there is within the West and within our kind of values about how we think the world should work, a view that there are rules and that those rules transcend the interests of great powers. Those rules include principles like the absolute sovereignty of nations and states, the immutable sovereignty, the extent to which there are liberal international values that are responsible, people would argue, for so much of the prosperity that we've enjoyed over the last half century or more. So tonight's debate is about acknowledging or not Russia's security interests. What would your response be to someone who would say, no, we shouldn't acknowledge their interests because this is bigger than Russia. This is about the kind of world we want. And if we acknowledge Russia's war of aggression, that world will slip away, and there are other great powers, China most notably, who will receive an object lesson in the perceived weakness of the West in terms of its own ability to assert its values, its vision of how the world should work.
Well, I think during the unipolar moment, which ran roughly from 1990, the end of the Cold War, until 2017 when President Trump moved into the White House. During that unipolar moment, the United States had an opportunity, because it was the sole great power on the planet, to shape the world in the way that you just described. We pursued a policy that I would call liberal hegemony. The idea was to create a liberal world order that transcended the past, that moved beyond great power politics, that moved beyond realism. That endeavor failed, and the unipolar moment is over with. And we now live in a world where there are three great powers. We've gone from unipolarity to multipolarity. And this unipolar world is going to be a brutal world. The fact of the matter is, despite all the focus these days on US-Russian relations, the real fight that's coming is in terms of US-China relations. Russia is not a peer competitor to the United States. China is a peer competitor. We have our gun sights on China. We're going to go to great lengths to contain China, and indeed we're going to go to great lengths to roll back its power, the same way we tried to contain and then roll back the Soviet Union. The United States is going to pursue ruthless policies towards China, just as it did towards the Soviet Union. So what we have going on here is the United States of America that is acting in a very hard-nosed way towards Russia and acting in a very hard-nosed way towards China. This tells you that the world of the future, this multipolar world, is going to be very much a balance of power or a realist world, and there's going to be very little room for liberal idealism.
Final question that I'm asking all of our debaters before the debate tonight. Put your mind forward 5 years. What does the situation of Ukraine, Russia, and NATO look like half a decade from now? Who's where and who's doing what?
It's very hard to say. And the reason I say that is I don't know how the Ukraine war ends anytime soon. It's important to understand that for Russia, they have to win in Ukraine. Because if they lose, Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, and that's an existential threat. That's an absolute no-no. So the Russians are in this one for the long term. Furthermore, the United States has made it clear that its goals in Ukraine include decisively defeating the Russians in Ukraine, strangling the Russian economy, bringing the Russians to their knees, and in effect, if you listen to General Austin, the Secretary of Defense, knocking the Russians out of the ranks of the great powers. This is a way of saying that we're in this one for the long term. We're fully committed to bringing the Russians to their knees. And the Russians are fully committed to winning in Ukraine and preventing Ukraine from becoming a part of NATO. Both sides can't win, and it's hard to see where the compromise is. And furthermore, we're talking about the possible use of nuclear weapons. The Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, testified on Tuesday that there are two circumstances under which she believes there's a good chance the Russians will use nuclear weapons. The first is if NATO enters the fray, or if the Americans enter the fray, or if the Russians think that they are losing in Ukraine. Well, you want to remember that our goal is to make sure that the Russians lose in Ukraine, which Avril Haines is telling us, I think quite correctly, is the one scenario where they are likely to use nuclear weapons. So the great paradox here, and it's indeed a perverse paradox, is that the more successful we are in the West in achieving our present goals, the more likely it is that the Russians will use nuclear weapons. So we are in a very dangerous situation. And again, as I said to you, I don't see where the off-ramp here is for either side. So I see this one going on and on for the foreseeable future. And I see the possibility of Ukraine being completely destroyed as very great, and I see the possibility of nuclear war as real. So this is, I think, a very worrisome situation. And this is why Steve and I are going to make the point tonight in the debate that what we really want to do here is go to great lengths to shut this down before it spins completely out of control.